talk open source. Coming off of the CrowdStrike issue, I got an interesting pitch in my inbox that open source was the solution and that I should have Doug Milburn on my show. I admit I was a little skeptical, and I even said as much during the pitch. They wanted to make their case, so Doug Milburn joins me from 45 Drives on this bonus episode of The Business of Tech. Looking to reach an audience of thousands of MSPs and IT service providers? Put your ad right here on The Business of Tech and be on the show that 64% of MSPs report having listened to. A recurring top 50 tech news podcast. There are affordable options for you to reach our audience, and we can support any budget. Podcast listeners are more engaged, have a higher level of brand retention, and are more willing to listen to ads here than any other avenues. Want to know more? There's information at mspradio.com/engage, including a button to book a time to talk. I'm looking forward to that discussion. Well, Doug, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
All right, we're going to start right at the beginning. Give me your pitch on why you think open source is the solution that we as technologists, managed services providers, and IT services should be deploying with customers.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Risk reduction. It's all about risk reduction. It's, you need to get your customers systems that work and that continue to work. That's it, right? And that's that whole thing of risk. It's got to be reliable. It's got to work, and it's got to be secure. And especially if you're in that small serving SMBs, it's got to be cost effective. And the solution that checks all those boxes is open source.
Well, so I'm gonna push back a little bit. There's a classic XKD comic that we all talk about when we talk about open source. There's all these great projects, but actually, when you really dig into open source, there's a collection of things, and there's always connections of projects, and there's always this one small project run by this one guy out in the middle of nowhere that doesn't get enough support, that is part of that ecosystem. Log4j is exactly that sort of example. It's not entirely fair to say you're completely reducing that risk. You're trading one set of risks for another. So let's get into it a little bit more. Like, what makes the model actually different, and it's able to overcome this, in my mind, rightful perception that it actually is not this massive army of developers. In fact, it is kind of hamstrung by resources too. Give me how that actually works.
Well, look, I'm going to say it's how you use open source. Open source itself is just a concept. It's community developed software. Got this real advantage that it pulls a collective brain in. It's driven by the people who use it. The organizations contribute are the ones that use it. So it ends up being as powerful or more powerful often than and efficient than proprietary sources. It's a giant category. So to generalize on it just isn't fair. What we do at our company, it's about how you use it. And open source, the risk of open source, if you do open source, if a customer does or organization does open source on their own, you can do this if you want. But look, the risks. Let me compare it to legacy. I'm going to talk about enterprise proprietary. And that word proprietary, legacy enterprise covers that, whatever else. And I know it's not really part of the discussion here, but they own you. And they, anytime they can reach into your system and change things through updates, forced updates and things like that. They can change the terms. So many organizations use VMware, and that the carpet got pulled out from underneath contractually. You got this big contractual risk in that of people owning you, and you have no control. You have to trust. You can't verify. Flip over the other side. Open source. You want to tackle these things by open source. Open source, it's project risk. It's people go in, Azure developers, there's distros, Linux distros everywhere. There's projects all over. And you got to make sense out of that is what you got to do. Because if you go into and implement open source on an ad hoc basis, you have something called project risk. You've traded contractual risk and somebody owning you for project risk. And the way that you mitigate that is, you as a managed service provider, what you need to do is you need to figure out how you implement it. You need to break it down. You need to catch your implementation of it. It's about your implementation. There's so many pieces there. You got to bring the right pieces together to get the jobs done. That's what we do at 45 Drives. And we very much bring it all together. And we make it, I'll give you an example. And again, I will use the word enterprise, but it's not the right word for this. Rocky Linux. So, the Linux, the basic operating system itself, there's so many distros in Linux, and they have their own environments on top of that, or whether they're just shelling to them, or whether they got UIs on top of it. And so Rocky is the open, free. I'm going to say the word enterprise, but what it means is it's stable. It's for people who are in business. Right? That word is just that buzzword gets thrown around. It's for people in business who want to run something and just want it to work. What's it mean? Updates. Updates are a huge risk element in keeping your computer systems going, as you might have noticed with the CrowdStrike thing, right? And little incident that happened, and that whole thing. The Linux world has that so under control because the way updates get rolled out. You've got very, very active development on kernels. You got all kinds of new and exciting stuff happening. Great. You got distros that grab that, and their big thing is that they're the new and exciting distros. You're not going to use this in business, right? And what you do is you stay on something like Rocky, and Rocky holds you back. I mean, if it's mission critical, security hole or something, it can move through right away. But all those other, new and wonderful things that they want to push through, they get vetted very, very heavily. So staying in something conservative like that's mission critical. And then just the way you implement it. The big thing in implementing open source, it's your approach. It's your architecture that you create at the start of it. If you create the right architecture, use the right components, approach it the right way, you can get results that are so bulletproof, so safe, so reliable, they'll compete just about anything that's proprietary. And then if you do that right, on top of it, you now own it, your client owns their implementation. Nobody can pull the carpet out. There's no contract renewal for it. What if the distro or whatever, or project kind of disappears? Well, you still own it, and you can still use it as long as you want. Example, CentOS got the carpet pulled out from underneath it by the good people at Red Hat and IBM. And they just said, yeah, no more free. This whole conservative, business-oriented distro Linux just disappeared. So good. Branched. We're actually a founding sponsor of Rocky. And then along comes Rocky. Take what they got, move off, do your own thing with it. The level of security in it is quite amazing. You compare that to proprietary software where they decide they're going to change. And they're changing for their purposes. So most of the time it lines up. They're not evil people and out to get you. In fact, quite the opposite. They're to serve customers. But when they push updates, they make changes, so many times, it's for their purposes. And they own you. And, and it's totally the opposite in open source. It's by the community for the community.
Well, so I want to push on this a little bit because, I hear you, but one of the things you laid out there was in order to make this leap, you as a managed services provider, IT services company, have to do all of this additional work of selecting and designing and working with the systems. One of the reasons why closed source has worked traditionally in kind of a managed services and IT services delivery is that those companies then also have resources and commit to working with their partners, particularly in a channel style relationship, right? You have people and resources to work with to help you with that bid. And particularly if you're a typical, small business managed services provider, you're managing an entire collection of products. In a way, you're actually saying, no, to go to open source, you have to open this up to have to select across more products that you are unfamiliar with. You have to be involved with more of that. Oh, and we're removing the mechanisms of support that are there for you. How would you advise then, a managed services provider, IT services company that's looking at that saying like, well, that's a lot of work I'm trading for. Who's going to help me with that? And how's going to get me through that process if there aren't companies privately to do it?
Well, it's really interesting. It's exactly what we do for a living. And, and we sell to, the whole MSP world itself and that movement through to small business, we're actually just coming out with a division. It's going to be our professional division, and it's going to sell to MSPs and take what we do. We've done that work. That work is out there to do. You got to go up the learning curve on it. It's a lot of work. Yeah, and depending how big you are, if you have enough critical mass in your organization, you can have the resources to do that. If not, you don't have the resources to do it, and you got to get it from somewhere else. It's what we do in storage and virtualization. Standalone servers, clustered, and Proxmox for virtualization. So we do. We package it up. We make it simple. We automate it. We put the packages together, and we just make it really, really simple for our customers to use.
So I want to get a sense. So you talk about open source. Are you saying open source? Do you believe in open source everywhere? From my perspective as kind of an analyst, the Linux on the desktop conversation is dead and gone and no longer relevant, and it doesn't have a market share. Like, are you essentially saying, no, Dave, you're wrong? Like, we actually should be replacing everything with open source?
Well, it's a great question. It's really pertinent to us right now. The server room. As far as I'm concerned, everything in the server room, proprietary doesn't make sense to me in the server room. It's the alternatives. It's better. It's faster, better, cheaper. It's like open source for the server room. You got to know how to do it, but faster, better, cheaper. And, it really does own the server room. And you get to desktop, and it's just absolutely a fascinating subject. So in our organization, we're actually actively moving Linux onto desktops. We'll keep you informed, let you know how it goes. We've had some real success in certain areas. Why? Microsoft, and okay, I'm not a Microsoft hater. Like, I got a lot of respect for them. I grew up with Microsoft, open ecosystem. They used to do things pretty shaky technically, Windows 3.1, and they got better, continuously better, and they tame a hardware zoo down, right? Create an environment for it. So I give Microsoft their due. But there's practices in Microsoft that really irritate me, and they just poke me in the eye. And if they didn't do that, this probably wouldn't be a hot topic. One of them, forced updates. Okay, forced updates from an irritation, being late for video conference because you didn't say yes to their update, and then it just decided to do it, and you got to sit there and watch Billy Gates' little spinny thing go while you're supposed to be logged on, and get my cell phone and they're and slacking somebody and saying, yeah, I'm going to be late from a video conference. Just bear with me as I update. That's irritating. Okay, but it gets worse than that. So in updates, the inability to manage updates, that's the time issue, and assuming it all goes well. So in our organization, last week we had two outages. Our sales force, we have two sales groups, and they use Microsoft Outlook. It's Windows environment, use Microsoft Outlook, which I'm comfortable with Outlook. I'm on Microsoft on my desktop. I'm on Linux at home, and I use Microsoft here. And I got nothing inherently against it, but then they pushed these updates through. So they updated Outlook, pushed the push update, and they broke its ability to handle certain types of attachments that are just the type that we use. And so what happened is you'd send an email and your Outlook would freeze for 5 minutes, shut down our Salesforce. A couple days later, they pushed another update down to Windows itself, and we use Roland printers in one part of the operation in their manufacturing, and it shut that down. And you go, and then along comes CrowdStrike, right? And you go, that model of, look, U.S. president said, trust and verify. If you're in proprietary, trust, have faith is what you got. You have no ability to verify. And how serious that is when you shut people down. It's one thing if you're just irritating, causes small productivity losses. Yeah, I'll get over that. It's just part of doing it. But the ability, it amazes me. We stand back and think about it, and I look at how we deal with updates in open source. They're vetted, they're layered. We can choose what we put in. If it's frivolous and Windows decides to update the menus, you're going to go to ribbons instead of menus. And that gets jammed through your software that you paid for. Now we got to train a bunch of people, a bunch of users, right? And I didn't want that. It's of no advantage to me. And I got to put up with that. But when they can reach in through your firewall, anytime they want, change anything they want, it gives you that risk, unwanted, frivolous updates. What if they make a whoopsie honest mistake, which we believe CrowdStrike was, and shut you down? Whoops. Or what if somebody, let's say somebody co-opted and decided to put a back door into your proprietary software, and then the updater reaches in and jams that back door in there? You'll never know. And let me tell you, in open source, there was an event happened about 3 or 4 months ago where a developer discovered, he noticed that his SSH shell, the login screen was just taking a little bit longer. He dug into it, he went in the source code, and he found that there is the whole thing unraveled. There's a back door that was jammed into SSH, which is the shell program that runs, that everybody uses to console into their Linux, and that it had a very serious, probably state level backdoor put in there. Hadn't worked its way out yet, but he noticed it. It was noticed by the community because one person noticed a fraction of a second longer in a login. Imagine calling up Microsoft and saying, "Yeah, I just noticed my login screen takes a half second longer." Hear the snickers on the other end, and they'd go on what they're doing. Not saying that Microsoft is evil and going to put that stuff in, but they will get co-opted. The open source community is open to it. They are just as open. Just your odds of finding out, it's trust, can't verify. So
I'm going to push back a little bit here, Doug, because actually your stories about updates actually tells me you don't hire a managed services provider, because most managed services providers, part of the responsibility is managing those patch rollouts, particularly around Microsoft. Microsoft gives all the tools for providers to do that and be involved in the testing and making sure that the software was working together. So I know my audience is screaming right now saying, yeah, but that's our job. That's what we do, and the value we bring to the customer is preventing that. I know no managed services provider that I know would say just leave auto updates on. They actually make sure that they're part of the process to understand what's being deployed, and they've done understood the interaction between other line of business applications. So I want to make sure that we're focusing on the right stuff here, because I'm not entirely convinced we can get to a completely open source world if you've got companies that are building line of business applications that need to be in place, and I'm not entirely sure it's fair to say, well, Linux doesn't have this. By the way, I'll observe CrowdStrike had a Linux panic this just a month ago. They had an issue with their product running on Linux that caused a kernel panic. So if you were running CrowdStrike in Linux, you could also take down that system. So there are still interactions that are dealt with here, unless you can get to a world of only open source software, which I'm not convinced we can get to. You're still going to have some level of these interactions to deal with. What's your reaction to that pushback?
Well, look, the whole thing in Linux, where Linux is, of course, run proprietary stuff on top of there. As we're replacing our desktops, we've dealt with the whole thing of what do you do for software that runs on top of it. And some of it's proprietary software that we're doing. And we've found in 2 different groups in here, our software development group is software development, technology development for Fed drives. They design boards, they create software and stuff like that. They're running fully on Linux, almost fully on Linux. They still have proprietary software that they use. There's still some circuit board CAD and things like that they use. We have other stuff like Slack, for example, runs on top of there. And where you are with it is, you have to manage. It really is my point. I go, you have to manage it. If you have a good MSP and they're managing it, great. My take is that the proprietary, you can try to manage it all you want, and go ask Microsoft to show you the source code because you notice something's bad. You're not doing it. You're taking them in faith. And that is the big difference. Number one, my point, you have to manage it. Linux lets everybody manage it. It's just part of it. You manage it, ultra transparent, absolutely clear on everything that comes through. It's not like the stuff that tends to push through. The other guys, the proprietary guys, tend to be like an omnibus bill in government. It's got a mishmash of stuff. Look at my Linux. Says last night I'm sitting down in my living room and pops up. You have updates available, and I can look through the list of everything. They're all granular. I can see exactly what I want. It gives you a better ability to manage it. And you're 100% right. If you're running proprietary software and it's going to screw up, you're in trouble. But I look at that and I look at CrowdStrike and, the ability to get into kernel level. And it's like our approach to security. Again, it's how you approach it. You want to develop something that's secure and is just going to run. I believe you can do it better on open source. What we do, we lock up root. The owner of the system, they got root. They want to give us access to root. They give us access to root. And the amount of software that, everything, you should have nothing unless absolutely necessary that gets into root. That CrowdStrike thing, I said it boggled me. It just boggled me that they'd set that up, and these organizations who are doing mission critical work would have that situation where those updates get pushed through like that, and that they'd set that up. That's one extreme. Yeah, if you got a great, somebody's managing it. If it's your own IT or you're using an MSP, great. How well can they do it? You can do it better. I would suggest, it's my belief that you can do it better in open source. Why? Because you can go, my example, SSH. You can go all the way to source code if you choose to. I'm not saying everybody's going to get there. You're just not going to get there. But you got a community of people, okay? And then that whole thing of pace of things moving through, it tends to be very controlled. There is so much vetting that happens. Just different pace, and it's different. It's a different level. It's trust and verify. So there's huge advantage to it if you're really serious about security, which I think people should be. So many of our customers take it very seriously. Look, your audience is customers. Your IT goes down. I don't know. Running a dental office, law office, small business, school board, etc. Their computers go down and they're shut down. That's it. The cash flow stops, and it's like needs to be taken seriously. Open source, I believe, is the best way to take that seriously.
Well, Doug Milburn is the co-founder of 45 Drives, a company known for its high-performance, large-scale storage solutions. He also serves as the vice president of Protocase, 45 Drives' parent company, which specializes in custom manufacturing for industries like aerospace and defense. His commitment to open-source solutions is highly notable, with 45 Drives providing Linux-first systems while offering Windows support as needed. Doug, I appreciate you joining me to make your case.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you, Dave.
The Business of Tech is written and produced by me, Dave Sobel, under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you like the content, please make sure to hit that like button and follow or subscribe. It's free and easy, and the best way to support the show and help us grow. You can also check out our Patreon, where you can join the Business of Tech community at patreon.com/MSP Radio, or buy our Why Do We Care merch at businessof.tech. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on the show, visit mspradio.com/engage. Once again, thanks for listening to me, and I will talk to you again on our next episode of the Business of Tech.
Part of the MSP Radio Network.